Anything in the self-funded employer space that is not delivering value, impact, quantifiable, ROI, et cetera, is starting to get really scrutinized because folks are saying, why are we spending all this money if the impact isn't there? And so if you can bring that to the table, brokers are going to have to pay attention to you.
This is The Direct Path, a show about the future of MSK care and the people who are bold enough to build it. Join us weekly as we talk with innovators who are challenging the status quo. Here's your host, Scott Hebert.
All right, welcome everybody to this episode of The Direct Path. Today, we're joined by Dave Kerrigan, the founder of BenefitPitch. Dave is an awesome guy who I've known for 3+ years now. He's been my personal guru on all things broker and broker mindset, as well as understanding how to sell and work with employers. Dave has an amazing background, which I'll let him share, but he has kind of been at many seats around the proverbial table, both from the health plan side and the broker side, and now as a software company that works in collaboration with lots of employers and brokers around the country. So Dave, so happy you could join us. I'll let you kind of get started here and give everybody a little bit of your background.
Scott, thanks so much for having me. I really am pleased to be on today. And I think you got it wrong, though. We've known each other more than 3 years. I was kind of doing some rough math.
Time has flown. Yeah.
It has. COVID years were blurry years, but I'm pretty sure we met before that. I could be wrong, but
I think you're right, actually, now that I think about it.
Well, thanks for having me on. As you mentioned, I'm Dave Kerrigan. Quick background on me is I was one of those really geeky people that knew that I wanted to be in the space of the business of healthcare. So my undergraduate degree was healthcare administration. And throughout my 25, 30-year career, not quite 30, but coming up on it, it's been hospital, home care, 2 different insurance companies, Harvard Pilgrim and Blue Cross Massachusetts. I've worked at 2 different benefit brokerage firms, Willis Towers Watson and Buck Consultants, and also did a stint with the state of Massachusetts Health Connector, which, if you are familiar with the Affordable Care Act, it is the state-based exchange here in Massachusetts. And I was the head of their business development and growth for the individual non-subsidized market and the small group market. And so a lot of my career, I've been working with brokers and solutions that offer services into the brokerage and employer market. Now, I've got a consulting company where I do projects here and there with brokerage firms, with vendors, but the majority of my day is spent with BenefitPitch, which you mentioned is a software company. We create a marketplace of vendors and solutions. We have more than 1,300 companies that have created a profile, and we license it to benefit brokers, employers, and health plan executives across the United States. And we've got about 21,000 of them across the country that use it, doing about 10 to 12,000 searches a month to find whatever solutions there are under the sun. And it can be musculoskeletal, diabetes, GLP-1, decision support, financial accounts, anything at all.
Amazing. So, I mean, the best possible mind to have here to help practice owners learn a little bit more about both the role of brokers and, as we said, how employers are purchasing different solutions and the types of solutions that are out there. You clearly have seen just how vast an array of options are on the menu. To start us off, I feel like we should maybe tap into your experience being a broker, and let's go really, really basic. Why do brokers exist? Why do we even have this thing known as a broker in the world of health insurance?
Broker is a term that's used in many markets, right? And it's effectively someone who's procuring something on behalf of another, right? You can work with a real estate broker. You can work with a travel agent or broker. You can work with a benefits broker. And generally speaking, they have expertise that the common person may not. Now, throughout the course of the recent 20, 30 years, you've seen technology play a stronger role. So like travel agents and brokers aren't used as much. You can just go to Expedia, right? When you do not add value past a transaction, you quickly become obsolete and you get moved on. What's interesting is in the space of employee benefits, the benefit brokers, though threatened many times over the last X number of years, they have continued to double down and deliver value, not without being incredibly resilient and changing business models and all those good things. But the benefit broker at its core, at his or her core, will be the procurer of insurance products on behalf of an employer. And you might say, well, why doesn't the employer procure it themselves? They can. And sometimes really, really large employers that are, 50, 100,000 employees might hire former brokers to run benefits areas, and they are well versed on the questions to ask, how to evaluate different insurance solutions as well as other vendors. They may well work with a broker or a consultant or not. But Vast majority, even in small group, as we learned working with the state of Massachusetts Health Connector. If you've got 2, 3, 4 employees, maybe you don't work with a broker, but as soon as you get closer to 10 employees or more, there's a really good chance they're working with a broker. So here's what they do. They, as I mentioned, at its core, will help do the insurance placement. So let's just say, Scott, you are a company, you've got 50 employees, you've got 20 employees, you've got 2,000 employees. You're going to be working with a benefit broker to say, hey, listen, here's the demographic makeup of our people. We've got young, we've got old, we've got men, we've got women, we've got, new families, we've got single, we've got close to retirement. We're looking to offer a benefit package for the purposes of attraction and retention. We want to hire the best talent, which is largely why benefits offered to begin with. It's why they exist. And it's why the United States as a market is interesting in that we are one of the few or only that tie employment to access to insurance and things like that. It is to attract and retain and make sure that you are hiring the best and the brightest. So that benefit broker will get involved to help work with a number of different insurance companies. Good point of kind of clarification. I don't know that everyone uses it quite this clearly, but I always say a broker represents many insurance companies. Someone who is an agent might represent one insurance company. So they're going to promote their insurance, nobody else's. So the beauty of a broker is that they have financial arrangements with everyone and they will be paid by the ones that they place. But they're kind of agnostic in that they can select any one of them and they're going to try to choose the one that's best for you. I don't want to go too far down the path of like the incentive side. If you want to go there,
we're going to go down that path.
We most certainly can, but let's keep it high level. It's the beginning of the podcast. Let's not go there yet.
Yeah.
Because yes, there are perverse incentives and yes, you need to go in with your eyes wide open. But generally speaking, they will then procure insurance, medical, dental, vision, short-term, long-term disability, voluntary benefits. They will also help find other solutions, like if they're self-funded, meaning the employer is paying the claims of their own people, and they have a high musculoskeletal spend, and they're looking to work with a solution that helps to control that. That broker can get involved to help evaluate and select those solutions. They'll get involved in communications and employee engagement. They might help answer claims questions. They might be involved in the data analytics to find out what is driving the high costs for an employer. So they play a lot of different roles for an employer, and they are invaluable in that the employer, if they did not have the broker, would have to do all of that themselves. And so generally, they will step in and help manage all of that on behalf of an employer customer.
Super, super helpful. I'm curious in your experience, right? How is the relationship typically set up between the brokerage and the broker themselves? In that, obviously, there's now, with how much consolidation there is, there's only now a handful of these true brokerage firms, whether that's the, Brown and Brown or the Gallaghers or the Locktons of the world. But at the end of the day, folks are working with people, right? Individual brokers themselves. How are those relationships typically set up?
That's a good question. Think of it this way. I always say there's the house and then there's the people that are part of the house, right? And so generally speaking, if I work at Brown and Brown, or if I work at Gallagher, or if I work at Hub or USI or Alliant or any of the different brokerage firms, and you said there's only a handful, believe it or not, there are a lot still out there.
That's fair.
But there are a handful of what I call bigger ones, mid-market ones, and then there's a lot of small regionals. A lot of procurement is happening. Procurement isn't quite the word. Merger and acquisition, where larger firms are acquiring smaller firms, and that has driven, a fewer, lesser number of the firms that are out there. But if I work at a brokerage firm, I am a representative of that brokerage firm. Any sort of financial arrangements that might exist between an insurance company that is paying the brokerage firm does not necessarily involve me, Dave Kerrigan, the broker. Now, a smaller firm may have more of a direct correlation between what Dave does individually to place insurance, but generally there's a house that collects commissions on behalf of the placement, and they pay Dave Kerrigan a salary. And that salary is largely or may largely be based upon volume of premium that I bring in as a producer, somebody who sells the brokerage services. So if I have a lot of employers that work with me, I generate this much in revenue on the insurance side, I might get paid a percentage of that.
So let's talk also about kind of some of the different segments of the market. In our world, we tend to work with groups that are looking to work with self-funded businesses primarily, right? And we've talked a lot and kind of laid a lot of the groundwork about what a self-funded business is and why there's, alignment to these entities. I'm curious on the broker landscape. It seems like these types of businesses need the broker maybe even more, right, than their fully insured counterparts. Because at the end of the day, they're essentially building a health plan. Have you found that there are brokers that specialize in certain segments of the market, whether that's fully insured, self-insured, and then jumbo employers versus, smaller SMB?
Yeah, great question. To kind of talk a little bit about the difference between the self-funding versus fully insured, the smaller an organization is generally, the more likely they are to work with a broker to select what I would call an off-the-shelf product at an insurance company. And that product might have disease management and a nurse line and maybe just through the network of whoever they have as their physical therapists, not anything specific, but options at hospitals and clinics for physical therapy. You might find that an employer, when they get big enough, and big enough is a very relative term. Back when I was really cutting my teeth in this space, it was like 500 to 1,000 employees or more. That's a good time to start to consider self-funding, which is you are no longer pooling your risk with a bunch of premium that are part of a Blue Cross, a Cigna, and Aetna. But you, the employer, is now saying, I am a risk-bearing entity. I will pay the claims of my people. So if I employ Scott and Scott tears his ACL, I have to pay for that out of my own employer costs. But if I keep Scott healthy, avoidable cost. If Scott goes to the ER every time he hurts his finger, maybe Scott needs to just call the nurse line or go to a local doctor or an urgent care and not go to the emergency room. I now, as an employer, am in the front seat position to really want and need to manage those costs. And a broker in those situations becomes way more valuable. Because placing insurance happens at a certain time of year, and then throughout the year, there's maybe not a lot more of hand-holding that goes on. But as soon as that employer goes down the self-funding path, that broker is, as you kind of aptly said, creating a health plan. Because they might use a Blue Cross network, a Cigna network, and a third-party administrator to collect premium and pay claims. But they'll look at the data analytics and say, well, we have high musculoskeletal spend. Let's find a third-party musculoskeletal vendor that can do fees at risk and performance guarantees, and we can really hone in on getting our people to make the right decisions around musculoskeletal and avoid injury. And then if they have injury, manage it to the best possible outcome. Same thing with disease management, diabetes, GLP-1, anything under the sun. That employer can then ask the broker to step in and play a really important role in both the selection of the vendors and solutions that are out there, as well as the management of the programs once they're implemented.
Love it. Love it.
And as far as group size, you see self-funding down to very, very small numbers. If you've got self-funding with a stop-loss carrier, you might be able to get away with it down to a couple lives, 10, 15, 20, 50 lives. Old school approach was usually that 500, 1,000 or above. That's when you have the law of large numbers and you could maybe pool that risk differently, become a self-funded, self-insured organization, and then be a risk-bearing entity.
Have you found that individual producers, individual brokers themselves, end up specializing in a given company size? So if I were working with you, Dave, and I noted that you were working with one business that had 500 lives, is it safe to assume that you work with a bunch of businesses that have 500 lives? Or do you find that each individual broker, each individual producer has a wide variance of who they tend to work with?
Yeah, great question. Think of it this way. So when you talk about the biggest brokerage firms that are out there, and at this point, they're almost not even brokerage firms. They would call themselves consulting firms. And that would be like a Mercer, Aon, Willis Towers Watson. They tend to work with some really big jumbo employers, and they have sophisticated teams. There's never just any one producer, right? So there's a person who might lead strategy, but there might be a lead account manager, 2 or 3 analysts and account executives, and they're all playing a role in managing that one client. What I always say, though, is when folks are like, should we target the big companies? I'm like, you can, but there's, the problem with Fortune 100 is there's only 100 of them, right? Problem with Fortune 500, there's only 500 of them. If you win 10, 20% of those, that's not going to, feed your kids for the lifetime of them, right? So you start to go into what's called mid-market. And mid-market is this big amorphous blob of like, what does it mean? Generally, there's jumbo enterprise, there's small group under 100, and then everything else is in the middle. So when you talk about the brokerage firms that are out there, they will work with small, mid-size. And that mid-market might be a whole lot of 200 life groups, 500 life groups, 1,000 life groups. I don't know what the number is, but I know that in Massachusetts, there were more than 500,000 employers under 50 employees. And when you expanded it to the 100 employee mark, it jumped to almost 1 million. Most brokerage firms out there will have a pretty healthy book of business that is very much in that range.
Love it. Love it. So let's get into some of the specifics of selling. We've talked a lot about selling to employers, but today we'll talk about kind of folding in the role of the broker in this. Let me ask the chicken or the egg question. Do you sell to the broker first or do you sell to the employer first? What is your recommendation?
Loaded question, Scott, but that's okay. I've got an answer. Depending on the entity, I'll often ask them really pointed questions. What is your burn rate? What is your runway? Do you have investors? What are the investors' expectations? Do you have a leadership team with expectations on sales and growth? And if they're saying we want X dollars by this date, and it is one of those hard, firm numbers, whether it's the VCs, whether it's the employer leadership, the vendor leadership, whoever it is, if their runway is tight, if their burn rate is high, my suggestion in those cases would be to go direct, because brokers are a wonderful direct to the employer. Brokers are a wonderful, what I call one-to-many tool, that if you can unlock it, it generates a lot of the flywheel, the revenue, because they start to regularly bring business. That relationship takes a lot of time to grow to get to the point where they know you and trust you. So if you come in today and say, we have this much runway, these sales goals, et cetera, I might say then your path forward, because of these factors, is to try to go directly to employers. Employers are in the driver's seat. Most of them will bring their broker in, but if you impress them enough and you don't really piss off that broker, because the broker, if you just go directly to an employer and the employer says, this is really interesting, I like this, and they continue to talk to you and you think you're getting close to a deal, at some point they might say, well, now we're going to bring in our broker. Now, the brokers like to be the trusted advisor, and they are the trusted advisor in most cases. If you have backdoored the broker and now they're coming to the table late in the game, things may not go well. The employer says, hey, we've been talking to blah, blah, blah vendor. Broker says, don't know anything about it. I wouldn't do it. And they're just basically squashing the deal before you're even able to get off the ground. So now you've run the risk of losing the employer business and pissing off the broker, who can unlock a whole bunch of other relationships for you. Not what you want to do. The play that is generally more lucrative is you can start with the employer and then say, if you work with a broker, we'd love to meet them. So it's still early. You haven't gone far. The broker feels like, okay, we're getting brought in early enough. This is good. The employer has said, we really like them. So maybe the employer will entertain that conversation a little bit longer. But what you want to eventually get to is, if you can get in front of as many brokerage firms and brokers as you can that are representing all these different size employers, and you are talking to them about the impact you can bring, you are willing to do fees at risk, performance guarantees, engagement guarantees. I mean, listen, anything in the self-funded employer space that is not delivering value, impact, quantifiable, ROI, et cetera, is starting to get really scrutinized, because folks are saying, why are we spending all this money if the impact isn't there? And so if you can bring that to the table, brokers are going to have to pay attention to you. And then if you can gain one client, one employer client from a broker, and you wow them, you deliver, the service is great, the ROI is there. Now that broker's going, wow, didn't know these guys were as good as they are. I have a couple other groups. Oh, and by the way, in my office, I've got 20 colleagues. And by the way, I'm part of a national firm with thousands of people. Now you're starting to get to this, talking to more people. But that process, to build the trust with that broker first, not a short amount of time. I always say, expect 24 to 48 months to
100%.
Really get it spinning, 18 to 24 minutes.
Yeah, we've seen for practices working through this pathway, we've seen exactly that be true. We've seen a lot of really great initial conversations with brokers, but then very little movement because there's nothing to trust yet. They haven't actually seen how you perform with one of their employers, and the last thing they want to do is bring an untrusted entity to an employer and then have egg on their face and look real dumb if it doesn't work out.
And just to pull that thread a little bit, Scott, because you just said something that's probably more important than you thought it is. If I'm a broker that's working with an employer, the vast majority of the dollars that are paid to me are generally some sort of commission on the insurance premium or a per head cost on the insurance placement. It's not musculoskeletal. It's not diabetes. It's not some other solution. It is the insurance. That's their bread and butter. And so if they put forth a untried, untested solution and it goes sideways, not only do they have egg on their face, but they might lose that client, which means not just whatever revenue you as a vendor might pay them for placing the business, all of the other insurance revenue gone. And that is a huge hit. And generally, I mean, keep in mind, brokers are risk managers. They will not take those risks in most cases. So therefore,
100%.
yeah, that's an important piece to know.
Let's dive into it. Let's go down this path. Let's talk about the incentive structure, because I think it's really important when you're thinking about your overall broker strategy too, to just understand, like, obviously we just described the political capital, right? There's the, I am their trusted resource. So therefore, one, they look good when they bring good solutions to the table. They might look bad if they bring bad ones. So there's a political capital to this, but let's get into the nitty-gritty of sort of the financial arrangements, right? There are various types of brokers. They all make their money in slightly different ways, but there's some pretty common pathways. Let's go ahead. Why don't you kind of unpack that, how that piece works?
All right. So starting with cleaner models, and then we'll go into something a little bit more complex, okay? There are true consulting organizations, okay? Consulting organizations will often say to an employer client, at the beginning of each year, we are going to do the following things for you, Mr. or Mrs. Employer. We are going to market the health insurance because you've been with this insurance company for 5 years. It is time to look at what else is out there. We're going to do this project. We're going to place a fertility vendor, a musculoskeletal vendor. We're going to do a dependent eligibility audit. We're going to, whatever it is that is agreed upon between the employer and the consultant, there will be consulting fees attached to it. So when these things are done, consultant is paid. Okay? Very much a standard sort of a thing. Like, as a consultant, I do work for you, I get paid. That is how it is done, okay? Going down the messier path, and then I will come back to like a mid-tier model that some advisors and consultants do. The other side is the brokerage model, which is we are, as brokers, appointed for multiple insurance carriers. And when you are appointed as a broker for an insurance carrier, it means I, Dave Kerrigan, a broker, can sell Cigna, Aetna, whatever the insurance company is. So then I work with Scott's employer and say, what do you need me to do this year? And you say, we want to market our insurance, our medical insurance. So I then will look at Cigna, Aetna, Blue Cross, whoever's out there, local regional carriers. You either retain or stay with the existing insurance company, or you choose another one, which, by the way, moving insurance carriers can be very disruptive for your employees. So they don't do it every year in the larger group space. Smaller group, maybe a little bit more transactional. Mid-large market, not done yearly. Usually it's evaluated every 3 to 5 years-ish. Okay. So now, as a broker, I have a number of different ways I could be paid. And this is highly variable. So I'm just going to give some broad brush, okay? So one is I place insurance with an insurance carrier and I get paid a percentage of premium. So if they're paying $1 million in premium, I might get 2-3% of it. Another model is, or it could be a related model, is a retention bonus, which is if I retain $50 million in total premium with carrier A, not only do I get the 2% premium bonus or payment, but I also get a retention bonus because I kept that business with, name the insurance carrier. Now, this is where the perverse incentives come in, because arguably, if I am this close to the threshold of not getting paid a retention bonus, and Scott, you're my employer, and the better option is these guys over here, insurance company B, not insurance company A, who I'm at the point where if I keep business with insurance company A, I will get X% extra. I, sadly, might decide to leave the business with insurance company A, even if insurance company B is a clearer, better choice. And this is where the misaligned incentives come in, because that should technically never be the deciding factor, ever. Yeah. Sadly, it can't be. On the whole, those numbers are not often that different, because what happens is if I place the business with carrier B, they probably have a similar structure. So if I've got a similar sort of bonus, I'm going to make it up here as well. And the broker should disclose a lot of this to the employer. So it is very clear to the employer, I, Dave Kerrigan, the broker, get paid when these things happen. Okay? So that way it's made more transparent and clear. And then the third flavor is kind of this hybrid, which is like, listen, we're not straight consultants, but we do not like the commission model that is out there. We think it should be way more transparent, and they try to do much more like percentage of savings and other things like that versus any other costs. So that's, again, high level, some of the ways that these brokers can get paid or reimbursed.
That final one that you bring up to me is fascinating, right? I kind of think of it internally as a value-based broker, right? And it's exciting for groups, that we work with, like the physical therapy industry, who's at the end of the day trying to buck a lot of really unfortunate trends in healthcare, which is this rapid expansion of costs mixed with this weird decrease in reimbursement. How those two somehow happen, I don't know how everything's getting more expensive while we're being paid less. And so it is really interesting, right? Because Dave, again, push back on me if I'm wrong. Even in that main model where I'm making some percentage of the fees they charge, as a broker, I'm kind of incentivized for the cost of healthcare to go up. Am I not?
This is actually a really good point. So there's two things I want to say about this. Hope I can remember both points. When people always poke at brokers and say they're bad, nasty people, I'm like, listen, they're not. You got to understand that everybody at the end of the day is taking care of a wife, a daughter, a husband, kids, parents, right? They need to earn money, right? In theory, it makes sense to move to this wonderful, beautiful model, right? Which is all value-based, all outcome. But what happens in the meantime? How does that company survive, right? Well, two scenarios. One is they exist today in the old model, try to tell investors, board members, whomever they are, we're going to change everything. We're probably going to hit a 5-year lull of really low dollars, but then we're going to hit it. Do you think they're going to go, absolutely, let's do it? They're going to go, absolutely not. You stay on the current path. Do not change a damn thing. So you've got this idea of when you try to change the model, as magnanimous as you want to be, as much as it makes sense for so many reasons, it is a very, very hard thing to do. That said, to your point, there are some of these brokers that are saying we don't want to work with the traditional BUCAs, Blue Cross, United, Cigna, Aetnas of the world, because they inflated prices with network and the reimbursement models for their brokers. We are different brokers. We're not brokers. We're trusted advisors and consultants. I will take a percentage of savings when I move you from the highly inflated network effect world of carriers to a direct contracting model. And then in years after that, because after year one of the savings, year 2, 3, 4 savings will probably not be as substantial as year one. So then you change it to a consulting model where there is a payment for services provided and oftentimes tied to value. I think that makes a ton of sense. The consultants and advisors that do this generally start with smaller groups because A, it's easier to do direct contracting with a smaller group with the regional hospitals and providers in an area versus something national, right? And B, disrupting a smaller group, which is like, listen, our claims cost are this, but if we change here, we're going to save everybody this amount of money. And there's 50 people. Generally, you can have that at a town hall meeting with your people in the room and they say, let's do it. You talk about a 10,000 life group, that's a lot more impact. That's a lot more disruption. Not saying it won't ever happen. I'm saying it's a different scale of a challenge that takes time.
Yeah, no, and it's such a good point you bring up, and I'll just say anecdotally, in our experience doing this, the broker is not the bad guy in almost all cases of how healthcare got to be where it got to be. It did not get there because of bad actions from brokers. They're just existing within the system. And to your point, for anybody that's looking to sell into this space, I love working with these more value-aligned consultative advisors because there's easy alignment. It's actually a very straightforward conversation, and there's some great organizations like Health Rosetta that's out there really kind of championing a lot of these strategies. But Dave, to your point, it's a tiny fraction of the overall ecosystem. And so you have to be pragmatic and understand that it's so much of the time, in fact, most of the time, the far majority of the time, you're dealing with somebody who exists within the existing system and the existing incentive structure. Last question on incentives, and then we'll talk about just some high-level trends before we wrap up. A question I get a lot of times is, do we have to build our fee structure with the expectation that as a point solution provider, as a solution provider, as a vendor, are we going to pay the broker? And what is customary in that arrangement?
Yep. Great question. When I mentioned earlier that these brokerage firms are paid these kind of percentage of premiums or per head costs for placement. So if I've got 1,000 people, I'm getting paid X dollars per head. In the percentage of premium, you weren't wrong. If the percentage of if the premium goes up from 1 million to 1.1 million, I, as your broker, just got a raise for not managing your costs. Like, that doesn't feel good, but it's how it happens. Per head is like, when we grow, you grow. That feels a little bit better, but those numbers will exist and the broker consultant will get paid those dollars. That's where the majority of their income is derived. A smaller point solution, it really generally does not hit a radar to be anything impressive enough to really make a difference to a broker. But that said, they're paid to do everything that they do. And so that means part of a broker consultant's job is to evaluate every single point solution under the sun that their employer client asks. And they technically don't get additional payment for any of that. It's just part of their job, and it's tied to the insurance premium and commission or per head or whatever that is. So a broker like me, I'm not licensed anymore, but when I was, I could evaluate 10, 20 solutions, choose one, and that technically wasn't paid for. It was part of my standard reimbursement of everything else that I do. So oftentimes a broker consultant will say, is there reimbursement for us for helping to place your solution? They're basically saying, give me a little thanks for helping place you, right? And this should be disclosed to the employer, like we're going to do a 5% of total premium in the first year, or a finder's fee of this, or whatever it is. No matter which vendor is placed. If we place you versus your competitor, same dollar. It should not be, these guys paid me more, so I'm going to place them. It should be disclosed. It should be standard.
Yeah, and we've found that pretty consistently. I mean, it's the way I've always told people to think about it is, it's just like any other channel partner, right? You want to have good aligned incentives, and a lot of times a way to have that is to ensure that there's value creation on both sides. So I think it's totally fair, and I think it's common. So it's a good.
And to just punctuate that, usually the dollars you pay versus your competitor is not so vast that it really makes a difference in the overall revenue that a broker pulls in. Ask them what's fair and reasonable. They're not getting so rich off of this one placement that you probably need to worry about it.
That's a great point. Final question, or maybe a couple questions it might turn into, in your role with BenefitPitch, you're obviously seeing a changing landscape of benefit solutions that employers are looking for. I'm curious broadly what you've seen in terms of the trends of what types of or categories of benefits you've just seen over the last few years really start to take off. And then specifically would love to also dive into the role of musculoskeletal solutions, and obviously the Hinges and the Swords of the world have made quite an impact. Curious to see what type of trends you're seeing with the brokers and employers you've worked with around those solutions.
Yeah, great question. I actually just got back from the Business Group on Health annual summit. They released a high-level report. It was kind of a top 10 of things that were being watched among their employer members. And their employer members, I think they represented like 72% of the Fortune 500 companies. So pretty good smattering of some good sized employers. Specific to MSK, it was kind of a comment about digital only solutions are not quite meeting muster, and the market, employers with younger generational employees, older generational employees, because think about it, potentially 5 generations, right? So you got boomers retiring, Gen X, Gen Y, Gen Z, and then Gen Alpha, all kind of like starting to squeeze together in tail ends of each. Digital only was not making the grade. And so they were looking for what they were effectively calling omni-channel, right? Which is, I want in-person. So related to musculoskeletal, I want in-person physical therapy. I want to be able to go and see my physical therapist for X number of visits that my health plan might pay for. I want to be able to do a digital solution at home to practice and to do my therapy or to prevent injury on my own. Oh, and I also want the on-demand, I want to call or do a video chat with someone because I did something, tweaked something, not sure I'm doing this exercise right, whatever it is, but they wanted it all. And so it was this interesting like omni-channel approach versus just digital, which I thought was fascinating because a lot of the Hinges and Swords at the time were very just digital only sort of solutions. And then you just start to see the market speaking and people having to evolve, companies having to evolve to that demand. So that's one thing I'll say about the trends. And then the other is, this is more of a personal view on it. But I think that the number of point solutions, the proliferation of them has gotten to be to the point where brokers, consultants, HR folks are thinking there's just too many of them. We're not sure how to effectively evaluate them sometimes. We put them all in place and there's questionable ROI. I think we're nearing a breaking point there for a number of reasons. And I think that solutions that are willing to really put their money where their mouth is, be third-party validated, put in ROI guarantees, put in strong performance guarantees, engagement metrics, you're going to stand a chance to get selected and hopefully deliver on that value versus the ones that are maybe not willing to take those steps because employers only have so much spend. And so if you're willing to put the money where the mouth is and put in guarantees and things, I think you'll be in a better position to win business and sustain business long term.
Well, Dave, thank you so much for kind of giving us this high-level overview of what oftentimes is a somewhat hard-to-understand space, which is the role of the broker and how they can be experts in helping self-insured employers, or really any employer, align on a strategy and choose certain solutions. So really appreciate your help. For anyone who is looking to better understand or to evaluate tools that they are building, cannot recommend working with Dave enough. He has been a fantastic resource. So thank you for sharing this knowledge with the community on the Direct Path podcast.
Scott, thanks for having me. Really appreciate you bringing me on today and wishing you and the team success and luck.